As I mentioned, I'm Elaine. I'm here with Jim Callback. We are the founders of the Jobs to Be Done Toolkit. It is a resource of learning modules, courses, free downloads, YouTube videos. We're just like constantly adding content to the toolkit to help you all like kind of figure out how to navigate this really great new framework for making decisions and kind of bringing people together using jobs to be done inside of your organization, and just to generally be like a more human-centered business. Or you can always reach out to us on hello@jtbdtoolkit.com with questions. We're on Twitter as well. I'm going to run through a couple of updates, and then we'll introduce Scott Burleson as our special guest this month. As you've noticed, we've kind of been mixing it up a little bit lately. We had Brian Ray last month, Scott this month, and we really enjoy just like fostering these conversations with other thought leaders in the field. And then we'll move into the Q&A, and you can ask Scott and Jim anything you'd like. This, as you may notice, we are recording, so we'll post this to YouTube. And after the session today, I will send out resources to anything we mentioned. I'll send out links to reach out to Scott and Jim, and also to like any articles, Scott's book, everything basically that we talk about here, as well as the recording. We have this year, we've been offering this new mini course, Job Maps from Beginning to End. We have a session starting next week, November 1st, 3rd, and 5th. And then we'll have another session later in December. I forgot the exact dates, but we're doing it about every 6 to 8 weeks. It's 2 hours, 3 days a week. So over your lunch break, you can come hang out. We keep the courses pretty small, anywhere from like 10 to 15 people, and they're very interactive. So we provide you with a ton of resources up front to kind of get yourself oriented in using job maps. And then everything we do in the course is hands-on. So breakout groups, activities, we'll give you all some research so you can work on like parsing out like the outcomes and sort of figuring out how to create your own job map, and then leading into like extracting insights and outcomes and integrating jobs to be done with other methods. Which brings me to our next free resource. We just issued a new free download. It's an ebook. It's called Integrating Jobs to Be Done in Your Workflow, where we kind of outline how jobs to be done can address some of the weaknesses that we have in design thinking, agile, and lean. So the idea is like if you can kind of mix these different innovation methods together, you'll have better outcomes by kind of addressing different teams' perspectives, whether you're talking to product, sales, development, how that can kind of feed into sort of creating this really consistent language for talking about the same thing in all of the different conversations that you're having, which is what does the customer need? All right. And that's all for me on the announcement side.
Great. And don't forget to ask your questions in Zoom. I'm going to interview Scott right now, and then we're gonna take your questions. So maybe I'll share my screen now, Elaine, if you can pass that over. Thanks for joining, everyone. I see we're again a very dispersed and international group today. Scott,
yes.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Jim?
Great. Thanks for being here. Where are you calling in from?
I put Raleigh in the thing, but I'm actually in a little town, Pittsburgh, North Carolina, just south of Chapel Hill.
Just outside of Chapel Hill, yeah. So if you don't know Scott, he wrote my favorite book on jobs to be done called The Statue in the Stone. And I highly recommend you check that out. Just brought so much clarity to me. And I think you call it jobs to be done philosophy, which is great. And we're going to get into a little bit of that. But before we do, why don't you tell folks just about yourself, what your current role is?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Scott Burleson. I sort of got interested in this new product development stuff. Man, time slips into the future. About 20 years ago, when I was a product manager with John Deere. That's a great place to cut your teeth. You get to play on a lot of cool toys out in the yard and dig holes and do all kinds of fun stuff. Right now, I work for a company called the AIM Institute, where we focus on B2B innovation. B2B is our focus. As you might imagine, it's very much a jobs, customer needs first system. We have training, coaching, and our own software, Blueprinter software, to help B2B companies to innovate by, as you might imagine, by better understanding their customer needs. But the coolest thing about it is, I mean, yes, I'm teaching and coaching a lot of teams. Well, the good thing about coaching a lot of teams is I still get a lot of exposure to lots of different industries. and lots of different, I get to try out, jobs to be done in different contexts. That's something I couldn't do, say, when I was working for John Deere, or even a couple other assignments. And the other thing I really love, I mean, when I was a product manager at John Deere, I just, in a lot of ways, I feel like it was just the best. You ever have this job? It's like, it's the best job you ever had. It's fun. You do stuff, you bring things to the world. I get to still do that now. I still get to be a product manager as we have our software product.
Is that where the new product dog Twitter handle came from? I was always curious about that.
I did that a lot. I actually created that a long time, like, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years ago. And I thought it was kind of cool how new product development, NPD, is also new product dog. And I just sort of thought it was cool, and bought the URL and the Twitter, and that's pretty much,
There you go.
pretty much it. Yeah.
It works on many levels. Thanks for that. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about how you got into Jobs to Be Done. And I know you worked at Stratogen, so I'd love to hear that whole journey.
Yeah, well, Stratogen was a major education for me. So before I get into that, my initial interest in what really was back, really about 20 years ago, when I first started getting new product development with John Deere. And the great thing about a well-resourced company like John Deere is that they're well-resourced. I was working with teams of electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, agricultural engineers, material engineers, software developers, designers. It's just all these things have to come together to build this physical thing. A language I can use with you guys is a tractor addresses emotional and functional needs. Most things do, but anyway, that one very overtly does. You really learn that when it's one thing to figure out what it should functionally do. It's another question is, what should this thing look like? That's a different question to answer. But I became very acutely aware of this problem of look, they're looking to me for engineers, looking to me for insight. What should the features be? Should it be this or this? Should we have 3 tire options or 4 tire options? And it's very overwhelming. And so I really just started reading. I'm sort of an autodidact by nature, so I just read. Man, I wish I could have benefited from YouTube back then. But anyway, I just started reading everything. Ran across Clayton Christensen, and it just changed my life, is the only way I know to put it. A customer hires a product to help them accomplish a job. I mean, those words, it's like when I first heard it, it just I didn't even know what to do with it. But I'm like, wow, that's powerful. And in some ways, it's not that new as it might seem like, because certainly for decades, who knows how long, probably centuries, smart salespeople and people developing products have been separating benefits from the actual thing they purchase. But Jobs to Be Done really gave a precision to that language. Anyway, so that was my initial start, and keeping reading led me to Tony Olwick, where I became a fan. That's the only way I know to put it, is a fan. I ended up going through their training. I was able to bring them into John Deere, do a lot of work there, and I could feel this whole time talking about all the value Stratogen brought to John Deere. But I became such an enthusiast that I was fortunate enough to be hired by Tony, and got just the best education you could imagine, being their consultants, brilliant, thinkers, big time thinkers in Jobs to Be Done. And of course, their method's called outcome-driven innovation. I had the great benefit, Lance Betancourt, who is one of the top leaders. We traveled together. We traveled all over the world, and we talked about the nerdiest things on the airplane and over meals. And I used that time. I was aware this was a very awesome opportunity to be around these folks. And so I asked a lot of questions, and I soaked up everything that I could. And in a lot of ways, though, there's always more to learn, though. But anyway, I think I got a tremendous education with Stratogen.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me when you and I first talked, that you were talking about this kind of behind the scenes philosophy, particularly there at Stratogen. And I know a lot of folks might look at a blog post or a webinar that, let's say, Tony does, or pick up the book and kind of think, oh, I get jobs to be done, or this is just warmed over, human-centered design or something like that. And the way you phrased it to me was, no, there's this whole other world too that actually doesn't even make it to paper.
Right.
And I think that's why I like your book so much, because I've been looking at jobs to be done for almost 2 decades now as well too.
Yeah.
And I thought I knew a lot about it until I read your book, and I said, oh, there's all these inner workings and philosophy that's going on as well too. So first of all, just thanks for putting that down on paper. And I just love to hear just a little bit more. Maybe you can pick out something like what's your favorite law, or what's your favorite principle?
I don't know. I had a hard time finishing the book because I kept reorganizing it. And I believe, as we discussed also, it's like you got to know A before B, but then you got to know D before A. And it's the sequencing was maddening. I finally had to fling it out there. But yeah, as the great thing about being at Strategian and also coming to Strategian, not as an academic, but as a practitioner, I was acutely aware of what I didn't know. I didn't understand this. I didn't understand this. And so when I'm picking their brains, I'm looking for very specific pieces, missing pieces of the puzzle. Yeah. And then with these world best practitioners, when they would actually go to do a project, there were a lot of these, I don't know if you call them unwritten rules, but they sort of were that. They're like the secrets of the practitioners. And the great thing about a consultant is they do see different contexts. If you only work in one industry, you can get a bit of a simplified view of the laws of the universe, if you will, as far as applying to innovation. But when you do this software and learning how a hand washing study and insurance and tractors and all these disparate bananas, they study banana, all these disparate things, then you really have to be in tune with the more abstract rules. And I really, Jim, I had to write it down for myself to keep up with it. And that's sort of where a lot of it started, was writing it down. And I'll say this, early on in the process, I sort of had this little dilemma. Do I write something that just tries to make this accessible for a lot of people? And that's not what I did. I really wrote something more for myself, to explore all my nerdiness, just embrace all that. But what's been really cool about it is, it's kind of like putting a note in a bottle and throwing it out on the ocean, in that all of a sudden you find these other people, literally worldwide, who have that same interest, reaching out to me exactly like yourself. And that's been one of the great joys of it.
Great. Well, thanks for putting that down in words. And I did see, when I was reading the book, I could see the architectural problem of the laws, and you kept repeating them at times. And I thought, well, that's brilliant because like you said, you had to know A before you know B. And I just think the way that you handled it in the book was really good. And I think that's what made it engaging, at least for me. It really, and we got a couple dozen geeks here on the phone as well too, that I think can appreciate your treatment of that deeper level of jobs to be done. I think the goal with my book was to make jobs to be done more accessible. Right. So I actually think the two books go together really well. That's why I love talking with you, Scott.
I was reflecting on that, just sort of thinking about today on that exact thought, that I believe exactly that they are very complementary, for that reason. I think one thing that may have helped is I joined a company called Actuate after Strategian, which was a heavy and great Midwest company. They had been formed of lots of acquisitions, which is to say they are a collection of lots of small companies, like $100 million, $200 million companies. And so what may have helped me is, Jim, I think I did a really terrible job teaching jobs to be done to a lot of different audiences. Mm-hmm. So I got to see the confused faces. Right. And I got the, being on the inside, not a consultant, I had the benefit, I wasn't gonna be fired. I got the benefit of teaching it a lot. And let me tell you, I mean, just like the idea of consumption jobs, I bet nobody's confused as many people in the world as me, trying to help them to understand the difference in a consumption job and a core job. So I taught it badly a lot. Right. But I did have a sense of where people were lost. And so I think that may have helped.
Right. No, yeah, I agree. And then, to some degree, that's what I did too. I had a workshop about 4 years before writing the book, just getting the right words, in my mouth. But not only that, but hearing questions from folks.
Yeah.
And that's why I think forums like this are really interesting, because we're gonna go in the Q&A in a second and hear some of those questions, because I constantly learn how to talk about jobs to be done. So if you have a question, put it in the chat, and Elaine's going to help organize those. But I want one last thought though, in your current role now. But by the way, you're really prolific out there on LinkedIn and Twitter, and you have all these great blog posts. And it's wider than just jobs to be done. What kind of your purview is? You everywhere from marketing to product development, and then kind of jobs to be done in the middle there. So check out Scott and follow him on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's really great. But how do you use jobs to be done now currently? How does jobs to be done inform your current work?
Well, one short answer, then I'll elaborate on your actual question, is I use it almost, it's just the way I see the world.
Right.
Now, in a very specific way, it directly helps me, is working with clients in a diverse industries, businesses. I mean, it's amazing just the list of different types of customers we have. But for me to talk with them, understand their market. I mean, I don't know how I would. So what's their product? What job does it have a customer do? And a slightly different question, what job does a customer hire it to do? Those are slightly different questions. And then who are the job executors? Who is doing it? Who's responsible for the work? And then, a consumption chain like Matt, so who maintains it, who upgrades it, who buys it? And so now a question I often have to myself is, with a client, to what degree do I sort of burden them with this and teach them about this? I'm always using it to understand it. Right. In fact, I mean, I have good friends at Strategy and Steel. I was talking to one recently about this question, and they're actually pretty deliberate about teaching jobs to a client before even engaging in the even in breaking down their market. That's probably something I should start doing. But that's certainly one direct way I use it.
Gotcha. But to that last point, sorry, I just want to pick up there, because maybe you don't have to teach them jobs to be done. Maybe you can just use a different label or just do it. And I know that's what I've done a lot in my work. Yeah. I've always been inspired by, Tony and even Bob and Clayton Christensen. And then I always just put it in my work. And a lot of people that I worked with, either on teams or when I was doing some consulting as well too, they got jobs to be done, but they didn't know it, because I didn't even call it that. I just said, we're gonna do this mappy thingy here, and it's gonna, that's a job map, but you don't have to use it. And I'll tell people that I work with now is you can white label the thinking of jobs to be done. So I love the way that you said it's a way of seeing. That's the way that I see it as well too. And it's that, for me, that's what's important, not necessarily the label.
100%. I don't want to get people hung up on that. And I'm also acutely aware of my tendency to go too far, it's hard for me. Like Clayton Christensen says, a customer hires a product to accomplish a job. I mean, I'll encourage everybody to go YouTube, listen to him tell the milkshake story. Right. When I listen to that, I'm like a little kid, and that's my, I listen to my grandfather tell us. I could listen to the story over and over and over, but it's harder for me. I'm trying to. It's like maybe it's a developmental area. How to explain it to a broader audience. Once I start, it's hard for me to know where to stop going. With the minutia, which was a wonderful thing about Strategy, in that you have this language accessible, and you can just talk about markets and stuff using. And so with talking with folks that don't have that vocabulary, it's like you have a choice. Right. You can teach them the vocabulary, or you can kind of mentally translate. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but it's something I think about.
Right. I have an idea for another book. Maybe we should collaborate on it. A children's bedtime story that 100%. Will help people go to sleep.
100%.
We're using jobs to be done. What do you guys
think? About that. I have 100% thought about that.
Okay.
So my kids are like, I've got a 9-year-old. She's like, well, she's very sort of intrigued by the fact that I wrote a book, and she's like, wants to know what it's about. And I'm like, and so for that very reason, I don't know if anybody would buy it except my kid, but I thought about it.
Do you know David Duncan? He's one of the co-authors of Competing Against Luck. I actually talked with him, and he wrote a book on jobs to be done. I haven't gotten into it yet.
Wow.
You know, James, you know David Duncan's book.
I know the book.
He told me it was like a story, James. Can you just jump on here and describe his book there?
It's and I'm sorry I don't have it sitting right here, but it is a story. It's a customer detective story. And it's fun. It's very easy to read, and he sneaks in the jobs to be done approach. So I love it. I've read it, and I've spoken with him, and I find it an easy way to get jobs to be done thoughts across.
Yeah. Have you ever come across that book, Scott, yet?
I have it.
Jobs to be done isn't a title. It has a little bit of an SEO problem, I think. But thanks for picking that up, James.
Yeah. That reminds me of. Did you guys ever read The Goal? Anyway, that was a book for manufacturing engineers and lean manufacturing, but it was written as a novel.
As a novel, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
which was very effective in teaching, also. Yeah.
There you go. Speaking of minutia, let's get into some of the questions now, though, and we'll see what happens here. So I'm going to scroll down here, Elaine. Where do you think I should start with?
That's actually my question.
Okay.
So I started that one. Don't see a whole lot of questions rolling in just yet, but please post your questions in the chat and we'll bring you on stage. I will add them to the Q&A queue at the bottom that you see here. But basically, I work in-house, and we've been doing a lot of like guerrilla. We're not even allowed to call it research. We call it co-creation, because we have a research team that really only wants to engage with like big picture strategy research. And at the interaction design level, we really need to be like testing prototypes and doing quick surveys. And so, Scott, I'm just curious, like what types of customer research do you work with your clients on, and how comfortable are they with doing that research?
Yeah, so we do the research for them, and we teach them to do it. We ultimately believe it's in their best interest to learn how to do it. But I can tell you it's a lot easier to do it than to teach how to do it. But as far as the type of research, I mean, it's mostly certainly for the purposes, 95% for the purposes of new product development, very much like outcome-driven innovation. You have a phase where you frame what the area, and then you uncover a comprehensive list of customer outcomes, and then in a qualitative project, and you have a quantitative in which you prioritize those and to understand, and there's certain metrics. It's nothing particularly unique about our method there. Uses a gap analysis, importance, and satisfaction. For how comfortable your clients with doing research, and how receptive are they to the results? That's a great question. It varies a lot. I mean, if it's a new skill to learn, and so you sort of have to be interested in learning the skill. If you're not interested in learning the skill, you can't really drag them through it to do it with excellence. But for those who are very interested, they can do it. They can do it quite well. They're certainly under one of my big talking points. If you read anything I've written, you'll see is how a big believer I am in the product manager position. If I may be if there's anything am I more passionate about product management or jobs to be done? I have to think about it if they're on the same level, because at the end of the day, somebody has to do the work. That's often left out, and anyway. I won't go down that rabbit hole. But how receptive are they to the results? Hey, everybody's got confirmation bias. If the results are consistent with what they already believe, they think it's marvelous. If it's contrary to what they already believe, they think it's flawed. That's just the short answer to that.
Great.
Thanks. So I don't know, Harold, this wasn't really a question, but if you want to come up and maybe just sort of introduce the idea that you're presenting, feel free to come on stage.
Hi, Harold.
Yes, sure. Hi. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, that wasn't a question. But basically, I have a question around, let's say, a job to be done analysis when the job executor isn't clear. And my particular example is from a client who is making an enabling technology. So basically, it's a software product which doesn't have a user interface. It has a function, of course, but it doesn't really have a user as such. It's enabling other applications in simple terms, to communicate with each other and to access common data.
Yeah, great question. Yeah.
So my kind of struggle with this, and where I'd just be interested to see how you would go about this type of a challenge, is like, who do I even talk to? You know, there is no job executor, but the product obviously influences a whole host of other people. So yeah, that's the question. Maybe just your thoughts on approaching something like this.
Yeah, I think I understand. Let me explain, and then tell me if I'm on a track or not. I used to have a slide, and I would teach a point that I think is this, and I would show a wagon, like a child's wagon, and I would ask, what's the job to be done of the wheel? And who's the job executor? Who benefits? Who's using the wheel? The answer is the wagon. The wagon is the job executor in a way, and it uses it for. We could talk about what it is, but sometimes you do have jobs that serve other products, other solutions. In which case, so who do you ask? Well, you have to figure out, well, what does obviously you can't interview them, but you do a thought experiment. So in this case of the wagon, what does it help that wagon to do? So it helps it to not fall or whatever. And then, what are the metrics of success? And you would have things like friction and whatever. But sometimes a job is actually serves a product, and I'm acutely aware of this because in our focus now is in B2B, in which you have lots of component manufacturers. They make pumps, they make a steering wheel, they make valves, they make cables. So we get to play this game quite a bit. Now let me ask you, Harold, did I understand your question correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
And thank you for giving me that very nice example with the wheel of the wagon. I think maybe just to clarify why that is an issue, or at least one facet of it, is this. What I like about the whole jobs to be done approach is that it helps you in different aspects. And one of them that I was trying to help my client with is to communicate with potential customers in a language that the customer would understand. And in other scenarios, job to be done analysis gives you the perfect ammunition, because you talk to the customer, you understand what they want to do, you understand the desired outcomes, etc. And all that I was struggling with in this project, because obviously, if it's the machine or a system that's using the component, or the wagon is using the wheel, who do you talk to? And therefore, it was quite difficult for me to use the theory to come up with good messaging, because, how would I message the wagon in your example?
In a lot of ways, jobs to be done, it doesn't necessarily make the world easier. Well, put it this way, without it, we are left with this overly simplified view of the world. Once we try to apply it, we're not spared from this question you're asking, Harold. We have to ask that question: who does this software provide value to, or what does it provide value to, and how would you measure? And then what could go wrong? What are the errors in providing that, in accomplishing that job? What could go wrong? And then so it leads you down that thought experience. It doesn't leave that ambiguity out there.
In terms of Harold's question about who do you interview then, would you go downstream and interview the child pulling the wagon to understand what the wagon does, and then to understand the context of what the wheel does for the wagon? Is that where you, because at some point in time you need to talk to a human being, right?
Yeah. So you would go to two roles come to mind, either the overseer, who's responsible. So you have to go to what job does the bigger system do? Who's responsible for the work of this software? Well, let's stick with the wagon. Who's responsible for that? And then in the case of back to the wagon, the child, I would say, is probably the beneficiary of how well the wagon performs.
Right.
And then you would have to, there's something, I don't know if you're familiar with an innovation method called TRIZ, T-R-I-Z, sometimes called TRIZ, created by the Russian scientists. It has not really, it's sort of lost favor, but it's fantastic reading. anyway, but they had something within trees called functional analysis, in which you look at what's the function of an item.
Mhm.
In other words, what's the function of this enabling software? What's the function of a wheel in the and when you sort through the terminology, this functional analysis is the same as jobs to be done, as far as I could tell. So this, and again, that's where jobs to be done. It's simultaneously new and not new. It's
Right.
sort of new words for things that we've been. So that's something that's 60 years old. Functional analysis, but again, it is new in that it provides a precision and a language. Because at some point, like when Jim contacts me or anybody contacts me that has a deep interest in jobs to be done, we can communicate. I feel like if you like my book enough to reach out, I feel like we have so much in common. We can just like start talking as if we are old friends almost, you know. So, but that language provides a lot of removes the friction out of sorting through something exactly like your example here, Harold.
And I'm glad you said that, because I always characterize jobs to be done as a language, right? You observe the outside world, and then you translate it into this Esperanto that then can be used as a way to rally around, what you're going to do next as a team, or to inform other departments inside of your organization. And you have that common language, which is why in my workshops, I focus a lot on language, right? And I know, in your book and, from Stratogen and stuff, like language is really, really specific. So I actually had a question that I wanted to throw in there, because I'm curious about this myself. Outcome statements, right? Stratogen has this really prescribed method for formulating outcome statements. It begins with a direction of change, as I call it, maximize or minimize. And I've learned recently that they're always going for minimize, right? Because you want to go towards zero. But in your book, you suggest that there might be other ways to formulate those outcome statements, like avoid and remove. Like you use a different language. You don't stick to that strict Stratogen language to describe outcomes.
Yeah.
Can you tell folks a little bit about that? And have you used that and tried to quantify that in that way?
Yeah, great question. It's funny. I have a blog I'm sort of toying with. I haven't finished it, but it's called I Am an ODI Purist. It might surprise you based on that question. But the I'm an ODI purist in that I really fundamentally I am 100% in alignment with exactly what Stratogen is doing now, and that you figure out what the jobs be done, and it's about eliminating errors. It's not adding. That's why they've gone all to minimize and not maximize. So there's two sort of things that I do a little differently. One is at the end, after writing this perfect outcome statement, I have one more filter that I just call readability. Because at the end of the day, if I minimize the likelihood of not doing such and such due to, and you can get these long statements, and maybe it needs to be that long, but I added that readability filter because at the end of the day, somebody's going to take a survey and they need to quickly interpret that statement. And so I find by using words like prevent, you can interpret it faster than minimize the likelihood of. Prevent something instead of minimize the likelihood of something. And so my thinking was that would make the statement not materially change the meaning from minimize the likelihood of to prevent, and yet make it much more, you can interpret it faster and interpret it maybe even more consistently. I don't know. I'm speculating there. I'm speculating there a little bit. So that's part of that, is to make it more readable. Because it's going to go to a survey. If only we were reading it, maybe it doesn't matter. And I also say that's sort of contextual based on the study. If you're studying surgeons or something high tech and rocket science, maybe you do need all that precision, assuming your respondent is going to read it and interpret it. Now, then of course I use the term error statements instead of outcomes, which really I think accurately describes really what Tony describes as an outcome. He's been using outcome language for 25 years, I believe now. But the same logic where they're saying, let's go to minimize all the errors. To me, it was again, I'm just trying to layer it in my own brain. So I called it an error statement. And in a way, I almost sort of regretted that in a way because And that's the reason I want to write the I Am an ODI Purist blog, because even though it appears there's a difference, there's really not. It's sort of how, Jim, it's sort of how I organize it in my own brain. Does that make sense?
It does. And I know one of the things that people object to with Jobs to Be Done in general, particularly if it's more of the ODI flavor, is that it feels very artificial. And a little bit sterile and almost, clinical, right? Okay, great. I got 70 statements and they all sound exactly the same. Minimize the likelihood of, whatever field you're in. And not even for the person taking the survey, but just to go back to their own team with their outcome, with the outcomes of their research, it also feels very sterile as well, too. And when I read that section, I kind of said, oh, wow, actually, that totally makes sense around the error statements and to use different language. What I don't know, though, I don't know if using different language, like the word prevent instead of using minimize the likelihood of, does that affect the way that people answer the question? Because there is something about that super hyper consistency,
100%.
right? And I guess you don't have any data on that, whether that changes the outcome, the survey outcomes or not.
I don't. I think it's a very interesting question. I'd love to know the answer to.
Yeah.
But just in doing the surveys myself, well, here's one thing. That's one thing interesting about the company I work for now is we not only do surveys, we have a method where we actually you give surveys to people, and I'm telling you that you really learn when you're reading the question, how important is it to blah blah, how quickly they can understand what you're saying,
right?
And so that influenced my thinking also in giving a statement to a person and then feeling like I had to explain it,
right?
So no, I don't have data or peer-reviewed study or anything, but it's sort of, so it's my.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to using that and teaching that as well too, because I think that's an interesting perspective. Do we have are there any other questions, Elaine?
I'm not getting a lot of questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to raise their hand and come on to ask questions, that's totally fine.
Okay.
Clara was sort of also responding positively to your conversation around minimize and asking, does it always have to be minimized that you ask? Claire, do you want to come and expand on that thought? Nope, no pressure or anything.
Yeah,
I just
sure.
like your comments a lot.
Yeah, sure. So, I think when I was previously working with Strategy, they were very adamant about the minimize, and I can actually understand why, because what they were looking at is not adding any survey bias by using new words. And so I was always wondering, is this like a real concern?
Yeah.
So,
because
behind minimize is the fact that you might just scan that word entirely and just because it's usually for our project something like 150 statements.
Yeah, that's right.
So
yeah, well, first of all, I feel like I should have said this already. I'm not sure if I owe a bigger debt to anybody professionally than Tony Olwick for what he put into the world. So that's part of the reason I want to write that I'm an ODI purist, just to sort of I want to sort of explain my case for this, why this has not put me in opposition, but actually is how I'm consistent with them. And so to your question about minimize, so they used to have minimize and increase, and in truth, it really is about minimizing, because it's about eliminating errors. That's what it really is. However, so my background again, John Deere. So you have this thing when your blade might get too close to the grass, it scalps the grass. Okay, so you might have an outcome, minimize the likelihood of not scalp, or anyway, or that's not going to work as well. You get these double negatives,
right?
So an even dispersal. So minimize the likelihood of not having an even grass dispersal. Okay.
Right.
I'm talking a little fast because I see the time. Minimize the likelihood of not having even grass dispersal. So instead, I would say increase the likelihood of having even grass dispersal.
Right.
The real outcome, it really is minimized, because it's really eliminating an error. I'm only accepting the positive to make a shorter statement, more readable, to eliminate that double negative. So that's part of my readability filter, is why I'll let the increases come back in. But fundamentally, it's about subtraction. the job they want to accomplish and subtracting everything that goes wrong.
But then you could just say prevent grass dispersal. You could say it in 3 words, right?
Right.
There you go.
Right.
Hey, I want to stick on this topic because the metaphor that you use for the title of the book, The Statue in the Stone, is about removing error. Can you tell folks what that metaphor is and why you titled the book that?
100%. First, it came from something I heard Tony say it all the time. I thought it was brilliant and I didn't know what to do with it. And he said, the purpose of outcome-driven innovation is to help a customer to accomplish a job perfectly. And he said that, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. I don't know what to do with it, but it's amazing. The purpose of outcome-driven innovation is to help a customer to accomplish a job perfectly. Okay. And then I heard this story, and I don't even know if it's true or not. I don't really care if it's true. But it's a story from the Renaissance when Michelangelo was unveiling the statue of David. Now, here's the most famous, well-known art in the world, Statue of David. He was unveiling it to the world, and the Pope was going to see it for the first time. And in the unveiling, the Pope was amazed, and he looked at the statue and he said, "How did you create something so perfect?" Now, there's that word perfect again. And Michelangelo thought for a minute, at least as I imagine it. And he said, "Well, I looked at the stone and I carved away everything that was not David, so that all that was left was perfection." And to me, that story and that Tony's quote came together. And that was, to me, that's a very powerful concept that product development, innovation, it's about subtraction. If you begin with what the customer wants to accomplish, understand everything that goes wrong, it's about pulling all that away. Right. And if you think about it, your qualitative interviews, your qualitative work, it's about getting the list of all the bits of stone, bits of rubble, if you will. And then your quantitative, it's about determining how big they are. There's some big bits of excess waste stone, and there's some little tiny bits of gravel. And so that's why you get closer to perfection by understanding which are the big ones, which are the small ones. So it really helped me. I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm just a student of Tony's, and this is like how I internalize it and interpret it. It's certainly not anything in conflict. It's really my interpretation.
Yeah, and well, that really helped me too. In general, that was one of the things that I liked about the book. I mean, there's lots of things about your book that I like, but it was that framing of jobs to be done as removing imperfections.
Yeah,
right? That's our job, is to find all of the imperfections and then determine which ones should we remove.
Yeah, right? That's all from Tony. Yeah.
Hey, we got something here from Wolfram. You want to come on and ask your last question here, Wolfram?
No,
Not
actually,
really a question, but just following
well,
up.
he's going to talk anyway.
It's not a question. It's just an addition to what you've been discussing. Thanks for that. So sometimes you have to sell to convince others that what you are convinced of makes a lot of sense. And when it is about making money, I use that quote which Elaine put onto the mural, which is checking our customer needs, and then let's create something they will buy compared to our competitors. That's what makes sense for me to sell and to explain it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
That sounds like, Scott, from your perspective, but particularly in the product management realm, that should appeal to a lot of product managers, right? Because they're really looking at that creation from creation to buying, right? Because ultimately you need to go to market with things, right?
That's right, 100%. And they'll have current products that'll need tweaks, and they'll need to market things, and they'll work with marketing communications people. How do you talk about it? And the other thing is when your competitors come out with something new, some new cool feature.
Right.
Well, if you don't I mean, that's the problem with the fast follower thing. It's like if somebody says we're a fast follower, what do you follow? Your competition comes out with something cool. It's like, question you should ask yourself: does it help improve performance on an outcome that customer cares about? Right. If not, then you ignore it. You see, so even if you embrace a fast follower strategy, and I think most of you say they're doing one, I don't think they're doing it anyway, but even if you do, you're not spared from having to know your customer needs and outcomes. In fact, I would say it's at least as important, if not more so. Otherwise, what do you copy? What do you ignore?
Right. Great words of wisdom. Well, we are a couple minutes over the scheduled time. Elaine, was there anything, another question or anything we should wrap up with here?
Yeah, Clara has one more quick question. If y'all
All right.
have like 3 more minutes, I understand if people need to go, but Clara, go ahead and hop on with your question.
Yeah, so like when you do jobs to be done, usually it starts with the qualitative interviews, right? And I wanted to just kind of clarify, Jim, in your book, you sort of talked about like how to check the outcomes and kind of see if it's clear enough. And so I just want to give a real good example. So for example, in our interviews, we heard something like, I hate budgeting. And so like, that seems to me, maybe that's like too broad. And so how do you guys break it down, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know about you, Scott, but for me, it's a super iterative process because you're doing listening up front. And Elaine and I talk about embracing the mess, right? You know, human thoughts and emotions and the things that come out of their mouths are very, very irregular.
Yeah.
And then you pass it through the filter of jobs to be done, and you get these very, very regular things that come out the other side. But that process of filtering is super iterative. So I'll put things down and go over them over and over again and look at things like granularity. Is that too high or is that too low? And then you look at things like word choice and formulation as well too, and go over those, and then go over them together as a team. So show it to somebody else because you have your own bias, right? And show it as a team. The one thing that I've also done, I have a little case study in the book where I talk about this briefly, but it's kind of hidden. We then took the qualitative statements, and before we did the quantitative interview, we actually went back to the market and validated them and said, did we hear what we heard? Right. And actually did that as well too. That was maybe going a little bit too far, but it's super iterative though, Clara, to get there. The other thing too is it takes practice. And Scott, I'm sure you know, like yourself and the guys at Stratagen, they'll be able to hear something and get the right size and the right language almost instantly. And it takes practice to kind of do that, just as if you're learning another language.
That's right. And those guys are amazing at it. Lance Bedford, just amazing at it. Yeah. And so when I hear like budgeting, so like Jim talking about the right level, that's one of the things as a new practitioner, they don't even know they need to be at the right level. Haven't asked the question. So budgeting, so you could say, if that's the job, budgeting, then what are all the challenges you have with budgeting? What makes that difficult? Or you could go a step higher. What does budgeting help you to accomplish? And maybe you go from there. But as the interviewer, you probably go both places. You go, how is budgeting helping you? What's the job of budgeting? And what makes budgeting difficult? What are all the outcomes beneath budgeting? You have to sort of go everywhere. Right. And new interviewers, I would just tell them just to take the pressure off, just relax, listen, because I don't know, it just takes time. It's like you can't grab a guitar and be, jamming within a day. You got to give yourself a little time to cruise up the learning curve.
Or learn a new language. You're not going to be speaking Spanish after one lesson. The one tool that I've always used and I found helpful, even before I came across Jobs to be Done, is the question why and how. That if you're listening to somebody talk and you hear something like budgeting, if you want to go up, ask them why. And then you go up into the aspirational or higher job level. If you ask them how, you typically then start drilling down into the steps and the nuts and bolts as well too. But that takes a lot of practice as the interviewer to be able to hear that, know its level of granularity, and then throw out a counter question, why or how. It takes practice.
Yeah, our books have essentially that same exact framework for moving up or moving down. I think we might have a different word or two describing it, but it's the exact same concept.
Exactly. Does that help, Clara?
Yeah, that helps. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. I would love to see a checklist on like how you check an outcome, basically. That'd be awesome.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. I think you're muted, Elaine.
Thank you. Yes, I was. All right, so that wraps up our October edition of JTBD Untangled. Scott, thank you so much for your time today. It was really wonderful having you. It definitely livens up the conversation and the banter is great. And let's see, if there are any leftover questions, please go ahead. If you have something we didn't ask or you were too shy to bring up, post it in the chat. We can do a video recording of Jim answering it later on, which is something we've been experimenting with. And keep an eye out for our November edition. It will be Tuesday, November 30th. So that's the very end of next month. Same time, same place. We'd love to have everyone come back.
Yep. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody. Have a great
enjoyed
rest
it.
of your week.